Iran's recent response shouldn't be seen as emotional or reactive. It's calculated, and it's strategic. If you look closely, every move appears timed and designed to send a message, not just cause damage. This isn't random retaliation. It's a deliberate attempt to reshape the balance of power in the region. Iran is choosing where and how to respond in ways that maximize attention while avoiding immediate full-scale confrontation. What makes this more significant is how Iran is expanding the battlefield beyond traditional military targets. It's not just about missiles or direct strikes anymore. It's about influence, pressure points, and signaling strength across multiple fronts. That includes regional alliances, economic routes, and critical infrastructure that the global system depends on. There's also a strong psychological layer to all of this. Each action is meant to communicate something, not just to the United States and Israel, but to the rest of the world. The message is clear. Iran wants to be seen as a power that won't back down under pressure. It's drawing a line, and it's doing it in a way that forces others to take notice. At the same time, Iran seems to be walking a very fine line. It's pushing back hard enough to show strength, but not so far that it immediately triggers an all-out war. That balance is critical. It allows Iran to maintain deterrence while still keeping the situation just below the threshold of full escalation. Another key part of this strategy is unpredictability. There's no clear pattern to what comes next, and that uncertainty puts pressure on its opponents. When you can't predict timing, location, or scale, you're forced to stay on constant alert, and that alone can shift the dynamic in Iran's favor. All of this points to one thing. This is not a short-term reaction. It's part of a broader, long-term strategy designed to challenge pressure, project strength, and slowly redefine the rules of engagement in the region. The speed and intensity of the United States and Israel's response is what really stands out here. This wasn't a slow, measured reaction that unfolded over days. It was immediate, coordinated, and clearly prepared in advance. Within a very short window, surveillance systems were ramped up, military assets were repositioned, and decision-makers moved quickly to assess and respond to the situation. That kind of rapid movement usually signals one thing. This wasn't unexpected. It suggests that both the US and Israel were already operating in a heightened state of alert, anticipating that something like this could happen. When responses come within minutes rather than hours, it reflects pre-planned scenarios, ready to execute strategies, and a clear chain of command that can act without hesitation. This level of readiness points to ongoing intelligence monitoring and a deep understanding of the risks building up in the region. What also matters is the nature of the response itself. It's not just about reacting, it's about sending a message back. Every action taken by the US and Israel is carefully calibrated to demonstrate capability, precision, and control. Whether it's increasing military presence, activating defense systems, or signaling through strategic movements, the goal is to show that they are not only aware but fully prepared to counter any escalation. There's also a broader strategic layer here. Rapid escalation doesn't just respond to a single event, it shapes perception. It reassures allies in the region that the US remains committed and capable, while also warning adversaries that any further moves will be met with equal or greater force. This kind of signaling plays a crucial role in maintaining influence and deterrence in a highly unstable environment. At the same time, this pace of escalation carries its own risks. When both sides are reacting quickly and forcefully, the margin for error becomes very small. Decisions are made under pressure, timelines are compressed, and there's less room for de-escalation through diplomacy. That's when situations can become unpredictable, because even a small miscalculation can trigger a much larger response. Another important factor is how interconnected these actions are. A move by Iran triggers a response from the US and Israel, which then creates pressure for another response, and the cycle continues. This chain reaction effect means that escalation is no longer isolated. It builds on itself step by step, increasing intensity with each turn. The targeting and loss of senior leadership figures introduces a completely different layer of complexity into this situation. When high-ranking individuals are removed from the equation, it doesn't just impact operations in the short term, it reshapes decision-making structures, disrupts communication channels, and creates gaps that need to be filled quickly. These positions are not easily replaceable, especially when they involve years of experience, strategic insight, and influence within both military and political systems. In moments like this, internal dynamics can shift rapidly. New figures may step in, but they often bring different approaches, different risk tolerances, and different priorities. That alone can change how a country responds moving forward. Sometimes replacements may feel pressure to prove strength or authority, which can lead to more aggressive posturing or faster decision-making. In other cases, there may be temporary hesitation as leadership reorganizes and reassesses the situation. There's also the emotional and symbolic impact to consider. The loss of key leaders is not just a strategic setback, it can become a rallying point. It can increase internal pressure on leadership to respond in a way that demonstrates strength and resolve, both to domestic audiences and to external observers. That kind of pressure can influence the tone and scale of future actions, pushing responses toward being more visible and decisive. At the same time, these kinds of events increase unpredictability. Established communication lines and informal understandings that may have existed behind the scenes can suddenly disappear. When those channels are disrupted, the chances of misinterpretation or miscalculation rise significantly. Without experienced figures managing sensitive situations, even routine actions can be perceived as escalatory. Another important aspect is how this affects long-term strategy. Leadership changes during a crisis can lead to adjustments in priorities, whether that means shifting focus toward retaliation, deterrence, or consolidation of internal control. These decisions are rarely made in isolation. They are influenced by internal politics, external pressure, and the need to maintain credibility on the global stage. All of this contributes to a more volatile environment, where decisions may be made faster, signals may be harder to interpret, and the overall direction becomes less predictable. What we're seeing now goes beyond traditional military confrontation and moves directly into the realm of economic pressure, where energy infrastructure becomes a central focus. When critical assets like gas fields, oil facilities, or transport routes are brought into the equation, the impact is no longer limited to one region. It starts to ripple across the global economy. These are systems that millions of people depend on every day, whether they realize it or not. Energy infrastructure holds a unique kind of leverage because it connects directly to global markets. Even the perception of risk, not just actual damage, can drive oil and gas prices upward almost instantly. Traders react to uncertainty, and when a major supplier or route appears threatened, markets respond within minutes. This creates a situation where a single action in one part of the world can affect fuel prices, transportation costs, and even food supply chains thousands of miles away. Another layer to this is the strategic value of targeting or threatening key locations. It's not always about causing maximum destruction. Sometimes it's about demonstrating capability. Showing that these sites can be reached, monitored, or disrupted sends a powerful message. It signals that economic stability itself can become a pressure point, and that raises the stakes significantly for all parties involved. The Strait of Hormuz, for example, is one of the most critical choke points in the world. A significant portion of global oil passes through that narrow corridor. Any instability there, even temporary, can create shockwaves across international markets. That's why even indirect threats to such routes are taken seriously, not just by governments but by industries and financial institutions worldwide. There's also a broader strategic purpose behind this shift toward energy-related targets. It expands the battlefield without necessarily increasing direct military confrontation. By influencing economic systems, a country can apply pressure in ways that are harder to counter with traditional military responses. It forces opponents to think beyond defense and consider economic resilience, supply chain security, and long-term sustainability. At the same time, this approach introduces a different kind of risk. Economic disruptions don't stay contained. They spread, they compound, and they often affect neutral countries just as much as those directly involved. This can pull more global actors into the situation, whether through diplomatic pressure, economic intervention, or strategic alignment. What makes this situation especially concerning is how easily it can expand beyond the immediate players involved. This is not a contained conflict where only two sides are directly engaged. It exists within a region that is deeply interconnected through alliances, rivalries, and long-standing tensions. When pressure builds at this level, it rarely stays limited to a single line of confrontation. Across the Middle East, there are multiple groups, governments, and networks that are closely tied, either politically, militarily, or ideologically, to the main actors in this situation. That means any escalation between Iran, the United States, and Israel can quickly trigger reactions from others who feel aligned or threatened. These responses don't always come in the form of direct warfare. They can appear as proxy actions, localized conflicts, or strategic disruptions that add new layers to the situation. This kind of environment creates a chain reaction effect. One move leads to another, but not always from the same players. A strike in one location could lead to retaliation somewhere completely different, involving actors who were not originally part of the initial exchange. That's how conflicts spread, not necessarily through one large escalation, but through multiple smaller ones happening simultaneously across different areas. Another important factor is geography. The region includes critical shipping lanes, border zones, and areas where multiple interests overlap. When tensions rise, these locations become pressure points. Increased military presence, heightened security, and defensive positioning in these areas can create friction, even without direct conflict. The more forces that are active in close proximity, the higher the chances of misunderstandings or unintended encounters. There's also the political dimension. Governments in the region are constantly balancing internal stability with external pressure. When a major conflict starts to intensify nearby, leaders may feel compelled to take a stance, either to support allies, protect their own interests, or respond to public sentiment. These decisions can draw additional countries into the situation, even if they initially preferred to stay neutral. At the same time, the involvement of multiple actors makes the situation far more difficult to control. With more players comes more agendas, more communication gaps, and more potential for misinterpretation. What one side views as a defensive move, another might see as a direct threat. That difference in perception can escalate tensions quickly, especially when actions are happening across different locations at the same time. All of this contributes to a scenario where the conflict is no longer confined to a single front, but instead becomes a wider regional issue, shaped by a complex web of relationships, interests, and reactions. At this stage, everything is building toward what happens next, and that's where the real uncertainty begins to take shape. Both sides are now operating in a space where every decision carries significant weight, and even a small move can have far-reaching consequences. It's no longer just about reacting. It's about anticipating how the other side might interpret and respond to each action. What makes this moment particularly sensitive is the level of readiness on all sides. Military systems are already active, intelligence networks are fully engaged, and response strategies are likely pre-planned and waiting to be executed. That kind of environment reduces reaction time dramatically. Decisions that might have once taken hours or days are now being made in minutes, sometimes even seconds, which increases the chances of rapid escalation. There's also the issue of perception. In high-tension situations like this, actions are not always interpreted the way they were intended. A defensive move can be seen as offensive, a warning can be taken as a threat, and a limited response can trigger a much larger reaction. This gap between intention and interpretation is where miscalculations often happen, and those miscalculations can quickly spiral into something much bigger. Another factor is the pressure on leadership. Decision-makers are not operating in isolation. They are influenced by internal expectations, public opinion, and the need to maintain credibility on the global stage. That pressure can push leaders towards stronger, more decisive actions, even when the risks are high. In such an environment, backing down can be seen as weakness, while escalation may be viewed as necessary to maintain authority. At the same time, the sequence of moves matters just as much as the moves themselves. One action leads to another, and once that sequence begins, it can be difficult to interrupt. Each side becomes locked into a pattern of response, where stepping back becomes increasingly complicated. This creates a momentum that can carry the situation forward, even if neither side initially intended for it to reach that point. There's also the unpredictable element of external variables. unexpected incidents, technical errors, or actions taken by smaller groups that can disrupt the larger dynamic. In a highly charged environment, even a minor event can act as a trigger, setting off a chain of reactions that escalate far beyond the original situation. All of this makes the next move critically important, not just because of what it does on its own, but because of how it shapes everything that follows.